Gordon? Oh, sure, sure.
Welcome this morning. It is when they asked me to do things at the Aspen Ideas Festival this time, I said, "Can I not moderate? Can I not moderate? Can I just be on panels?" And then they said, "How would you like to moderate James Brooks?" I said, "Okay, I'll moderate," because there is nobody, and I am not free and promiscuous with my praise, but there's nobody in television and film whom I admire more, and who I discovered in the day of research I spent looking closely at his career. I didn't even realize that I was watching his shows before I knew I was watching his shows. Anyway, welcome. It is my pleasure to be here. Our subject, and both nominal and I hope real subject, is what do TV shows tell us about ourselves? We will do that, talk about that in general, I think, and much through the prism of Mr. Brooks' career. By the way, he's won 20 Emmys by my count. 20 Emmys out of 47 nominations. That's a good batting average.
We should start by condemning Brian Grazer, I think, who was supposed to be on this panel and who didn't respect you guys enough to be here.
That's right. That's right. He brings people, thought leaders, to come and present ideas to him at his office, but he won't come here to do it with us. So there you go.
I'm going to have to disagree myself with everything I say today.
There you go. Or make your hair be funnier. So, Jim, if I may call you Jim.
Please.
You, in your mid-20s, before your mid-late 20s, before you got into entertainment, you were a news guy. You were a journalist. That's how you started your career. Was that the intention? Was that going to be your life?
No, so survival was the intention, and I got very lucky in terms of at that time, to be part of CBS News at all, even on the lowest rung, you had to go to an elite school. I had 1 year of college, but I was on the page staff, thanks to a friend of my sister's. And then I filled in as a summer replacement for copy boys in newspapers, desk assistants at CBS, and the guy I replaced didn't come back. So I got a job that you should go to an elite college to get.
At this moment when not only network news but CBS News was the gold standard.
You're looking at somebody who saw Edward R. Murrow in person.
Really?
Yeah.
And did he say, "Hey kid, you've got a future," or he ignored you?
There's somebody who wrote the person who wrote the great book about him, and I think spent 12 years doing it, and it's sort of amazing and thick. And they said, and somebody asked her on a show, what was the biggest surprise? And she said that he deserved a legend, and that's after 12 years.
Yeah. And once you, though, stumbled with your 1 year of college into CBS News, did you think that was just a job, but you would somehow get over into making entertainment?
It was just stunning that I was there. It was just amazing. They used to have everybody's home phone numbers posted on a board in the newsroom. And I never called anybody, but I used to memorize those numbers and walk around knowing that I knew Edward R. Murrow's phone number.
Yes. Do you still know it?
No, I'd be faking.
And then you started making documentaries with David Walper?
Yeah. Yes. It was, I mean, God bless him, he was a great man and everything. And he was an alternative to the networks at that time. But the ethical scale, in other words, we made it, I'll tell you the most shameful part of my career.
Please.
General Motors when the Ralph Nader thing was going on and cars were unsafe. Yes. General Motors hired David Walper to make a documentary proving cars are safe. And I was the junior member of that team, but we went to Detroit, and they actually tried to buy NBC time because it was General Motors after all, and they weren't able to buy so they bought this, so they created this enormous syndication for one night for this ersatz show where we sort of blaming the highways and blaming stuff.
So that was halfway to fiction, and then you went all the way to fiction.
Halfway to fiction, yeah.
And so then you began, I remember well as a kid watching My Mother the Car? You were on My Mother the Car, which was a punchline even then to a 13-year-old.
It was my first assignment. Alan Burns, who I partnered with on so much. He had created 3 shows already. One of them called My Mother the Car, maybe 4 shows. He and his partner at the time creating shows. And there was a grubby New Year's Eve party I was at, and he walked in a tuxedo, having come from an elegant New Year's Eve party. And this is how great Alan Burns is. And we knew some people in common, and I told him that I wanted to write, and he got me a shot writing My Mother the Car, which he created.
And then within months, practically, you were creating a show.
Not months, I think.
A couple of years.
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
Which, again, as I told you before we started, I remember it well as when it premiered, and it was a big deal, Room 222.
Yeah.
And if, for those who don't remember it, it was, as I recall, both a comedy and a drama before the word dramedy had been coined.
Yeah, there was the producer-director was Gene Reynolds, who later did MASH and later did Lou Grant with us. And he's one of the great men of television. And by the way, we have Jay Sandrich here, who's another great man of television, who's probably the greatest comedy director ever. So he's sitting here. Talk about great people. So we were doing, I think, the second half-hour show, certainly, starring an African American. And we were probably the first show with more than one African American in the cast in a prominent role. And there was a time of great nervousness. And it took Gene, who was ferocious in fighting for, at a time when it was really tough to fight the networks. It was never easy. But at that time, I think particularly
there were only 3 of them.
Yeah. Yes. And given the kind of show we were doing.
And this is 1969 or so?
Yeah. And then the pilot episode was about, Gene changed my life because he kept on insisting I do more research. I spent maybe half a year going every day to a Los Angeles high school, and he kept on sending me back. And it was like medicine for me at the time, and now it's the only way I can work. So that really changed me. And it's great because one of the things you get out of it is that you get to look at the constituency you're going to represent, and I think that really helps. And we had the pilot episode had a black kid who was going to be sent to a worse school, and the loophole under which he was able to stay is if they had a course that he couldn't get anyplace else, and the course was Hebrew at this school, and that was the final moment. Huh. And then the network was fine with us making the pilot if the kid that was helped was white, and that became because that in terms of easing the times. It's hard to imagine the sense of those times. And I don't know whether anybody other than Gene could have won that fight, and he did.
And were you, I want to talk about the research in a minute, but were you, as you were creating this show, Black history teacher, dealing with the issues of the day, in the late 60s, early 70s, were you conscious of, I want to illuminate, enlighten, shape attitudes as you were making the show?
Oh man, that's a good question, because I'm if I had to say what I hope to be my rule is not to do that. But in that case, you couldn't not do it. And I did it by wanting not superheroes all over the place. And that's where the second character came in, who was, a wealthy girl and who he had his love relationship with. So at that point, you'd be a fool to not take seriously, where you were in the scheme of things.
But when you said that you don't want to, you try to avoid that. It's that if I'm taking you correctly, it's that you believe if you start with an agenda, you end up with bad art, bad entertainment.
I don't. That's why I kept on not knowing what do TV shows tell us about ourselves, and I don't even know how to get to first base with that question. I think it's worth exploring. I think it's an interesting question. There are people who have done great shows with real agendas. Roseanne was a blessed figure who did a great television show. I think as much as it was appreciated, underrated, because she passionately wanted to represent her socioeconomic group who had not been treated well on television, and that was one of the most human shows, and that was it was extraordinary. I think people don't get how great that show was, even though they got it. So you can't say it's a bad thing to do when there are examples like that.
But it's a whole nother way to fail potentially.
With the Mary Tyler Moore Show, which came when just exactly with the feminist movement.
1970.
Where everybody wanted the wheel, and we were experiencing that kind of pressure. Susan Silver, one of our writers, is here. We were slapping everybody's hands to keep them off the wheel, of trying to make a statement about feminism with the show.
Slapping writers' hands,
slapping special interest hands, people coming in. There was who wanted that show to do their agenda, and we wanted to do the show we were doing, and we wanted to do our characters our way, which benefited from, which had a sense of the time around us, and we got a lot of stories out of it. But that was where, including our own hands, not our agenda, not our thoughts.
That's interesting, because you certainly, for a generation of people, men and women, you embodied it. You were it rather than militating for it.
And we got stories. We got stories because she lived in the time, she lived in those times, and we got stories out. There was a time when one of the most bizarre experiences I've had is there was a conference on feminism at the University of Texas where I was invited because of the Mary Tyler Moore Show to stay at the Johnson Ranch, and which was the women's movement at that time was, like a revolution with rumors and people trying to do things to stop it. And then we went to the University of Texas, big school, and their auditorium, 1,500 people can sit in that auditorium. 1,500 women were in that auditorium. The speaker before me, and I'm scared being here today, let alone their, 1,500 people. The person before me was Gloria Steinem. And I'm sitting there, sort of callow, and she attacks the Mary Tyler Moore Show.
Really?
Citing an episode we never did. I'm telling the truth. This is what happened.
You mean making up an episode? Was it an
I
episode?
I assumed somebody had told her something that wasn't true, and that she went with it, and she didn't like that Mary called Lou Grant Mr. Grant, and so she did this. And then they introduced me, and 1,500 women booed me. So I'm sure we all walk around with that thought that will never happen to us.
Yes.
There'll never be more than 4 women booing you at any time.
Right. Or one. That's so funny because, of course, in my revisionist history of, Jim Brooks must have been the hero of the ascendant women's movement.
A lot of good stuff came our way, and a lot of goodwill, and a lot of sense of purpose came our way, but that's different than having that agenda and trying to affect policy and thought with your show. Having that as the intention is something I'm always a little confused about.
Totally. All in the Family, Norman Lear's show, began just after Mary Tyler Moore, which was much more than the Mary Tyler Moore show, took the issues of the day and women and anti-war movement, all of it, as its subject than you ever did. Did you ever look at that as, that's another way to do it? I'm glad I'm doing it my way?
Oh, it used to precede us. I mean, one of the great things that happened to us is that we got to follow All in the Family. And, it was amazing. And we used to, you'd be at home, and we'd tend to gather together in those days to watch the block of shows, and we'd see All in the Family, and it would be perfect because we'd say, shit, we're not that good. We're just not that good, and look how great they are. And the existence of that show kept us kicking ourselves.
But your show was filmed as opposed to the videotape, which even, again, as a young person who really didn't know the difference, I thought, I like Mary Tyler Moore better because it's filmed at the time. Were you, with Mary Tyler Moore, which in addition to being a great show, was not set in a family. It was this ensemble, this workplace ensemble, which one could argue in the family tree of situation comedies without that, there's no Cheers, there's no Seinfeld, there's no Friends. Were you conscious of not only we want to make a good show about this single woman that's never been done, but that we are reinventing the format?
No, that people later said, again, we were of our time, and work home as it became something that a lot of shows did, and what was interesting is almost all shows then had freelance writers doing many episodes. That's changed pretty dramatically.
You didn't have a writer's room where everybody was
through. Yeah, we did, but you did assign out scripts as well, so that's changed.
And when the let's say more militant feminist interest groups wanted to get their hands on the wheel, what kinds of things did they want you to do that you weren't doing?
It wasn't like that because we were getting a lot of approval too, but we'd get correspondence and we'd get confronted frequently because it was a passionate time, and we were not a passionate show. We were.
You mean you were not promoting a political agenda in an explicit way? Yeah.
When Mary was thrown into jail for protecting a source, she cried.
Right.
It's like
Right. You did this thing which I suppose these days is not so extraordinary, but in the 1970s, to go from even the achievements you'd had in television into motion pictures was a big deal at the time. That was not easy, that transition.
It's hard to describe. When I did Taxi, we were on the Paramount lot, and almost all of us were friends, and Laverne and Shirley, and Tom Hanks was there, and he was doing what was the name?
Bosom Buddies.
Bosom Buddies, right? And Robin Williams was there, and Ron Howard was there, and Rob Reiner was there, and I'm probably leaving out some, and we're all on the lot together, and we were segregated from the movie people, and we had a separate entrance. And there was almost an absolute wall if you had worked in television that you could not work in movies, period. And it's hard to imagine because now, it's rubble, that wall. But it made our lives even better because we not only were really loving what we were doing, but we were also ostracized, which sort of made us the underdog, the one thing we weren't entitled to be because we were having so much fun. But it was absolute. I think there were very few movie executives who ever saw a television show.
Literally didn't watch them.
Didn't watch it, yeah. But this comes from, whatever it was part of the evolution of things.
Yeah.
But to an extent you can't imagine.
Yeah.
Some actors made it over,
right,
but nobody else.
Still, did it seem like a quixotic effort on your part that they'll never let me in? I didn't have a burning ambition to do it. Not in that way. It wasn't like I wasn't very happy the way it was, or ever wanted to end what I was doing. But we went over to Paramount and made a deal where they would allow us to make movies, and then they made the deal for so little money that you could never make a movie. So it was sort of like stuck there. But at a certain point, I wrote a movie. And Paramount made it, and this is starting over.
Yeah.
And interestingly, given our nominal subject today, so you make a movie about a modern woman setting out on her own in Soho, which barely existed as a place at that time.
You're talking about starting over?
Starting over. Yeah.
I thought it was about a guy whose wife cheated on him and he got divorced.
Oh, really? There you go. I just remember Joe Clayburgh.
You just blocked out Burt Reynolds. It was just.
I did. I have blocked out Burt Reynolds from my mind in general.
Not a bad place to start, by the way.
But did you think of, was your notion with that, this is an interesting story, or this is an interesting story and it's very much of the present moment?
I started with a book by Dan Wakefield that I ended up revising quite a bit, and it was about starting over,
yeah,
which I had done.
Yeah. And broadcast news, again, you looking at the things you make and the order you make them, it seems as though you return to what you've done and recapitulate it in a new way. So you'd been in broadcast news, you'd made Mary Tyler Moore, you'd made Lou Grant. Now you're going to do the definitive feature film version.
You know, I had stupidity / innocence going for me for a while. I think I went.
That's always useful.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, you know, there's nothing like it, and you can't hold on to it at a certain point. And I had done a movie, and I was going to do another movie. I directed my first movie. I was going to direct another movie, and it was just, you know, it was sort of great because I sort of so deeply took it for granted that I didn't realize how privileged I was at the time. And I just poked around for, what am I going to do a movie about? And I went to the political conventions, and I talked to people, and one of them was somebody whose name came up earlier, Jane Mayer, who's you know, just one of the great journalists we have, and she was sort of a rookie then. And I met some other people, and a story came out of it. And then I decided it would be a triangle, and then I decided it would be cool not to just decide in advance who got the girl, and then I made the picture, and I finished it, and I still couldn't decide, so I didn't. And it was just a perfectly innocent experience, in a way.
You knew just enough to be interesting and plausible?
And you know, shot it in sequence, you know,
Really?
Yeah, and there's this, and I took it for granted, but when you shoot in sequence and the actors know you might change the ending, that you know, it's absolutely codifying something, which is great to do, is you don't play for the result. You don't do a scene to achieve this emotion.
I'm foreshadowing this. I'm
Yes,
laying the
yes.
pipe for this.
Yes, so you can actually be in the moment, and everybody learns by what's happening. So it was, you know, just sort of a great creative experience that way.
And I might add, a great film as a result. Did you feel that I mean, the television that you were doing and others were doing in the late 60s, starting with Room 222 and then after, that it did have an effect in sort of slowly but surely changing attitudes? I mean, I think just on the level of African Americans in TV shows, starting when I was a little kid with I Spy, and then Julia, and then Room 222, and then The Cosby Show, and so on.
Well, and All in the Family,
And All in the Family, indeed.
which was, as you know, arguably the most impactful show in the history of television.
The most.
Impactful show in terms of really putting a dent in the consciousness
Yeah.
of forcing people to have conversations they weren't having. I mean, you know, I mean, you can't, you know, just, first of all, it was one of the most successful shows ever, one of the most watched shows ever, and had more to say, you know,
Yeah.
so.
But
That's the champ of that, I think.
and you are certain that that show and those shows in the aggregate had a positive effect in pushing forward the conversation and the level of tolerance in America?
Archie's chair is in the Smithsonian, you know.
Yeah. And then the more recent version of that's been talked about in terms of the effect of television, and it seems so manifestly plausible, it's hard to argue it, but with Will and Grace and characters on Law and Order and Modern Family and Glee, that tolerance for gay people has it been materially affected by those shows, or is that reflecting something that already exists and therefore kind of giving it the mass market seal of approval?
There's no question. And I remember there was a rewrite night on Mary Tyler Moore. We had Bob Moore playing Phyllis's brother, if anybody remembers the show. And we were looking for an end to the show. We didn't have an end. And we thought it would be really, we had a funny joke if Phyllis's brother was gay. So we did it. We just did it. And I think that might have been the first pronounced
This is in
gay
1980 something?
Whatever,
Yeah.
70s, mid-70s,
Wow.
something like that. And it was, the joke sure worked, the show sure worked, but it might have been the first where there was a...
And the word gay in the 1970s was still a fairly new coinage.
Yeah.
Wow. And in a case like that, were you so successful that the networks didn't dare complain?
I think that's still true, and it's something that we should really... See, my way of thinking right now, which is always, you know, which I always am challenging, and I try not to lock into things too much, but but things have changed in the movie business quite a bit. And in terms of this thing that you could never happen, it was always a gossamer thing, it was always weird chemistry, what made a hit movie. Now it's a business, and people can run numbers and be pretty damn accurate.
They are very expensive widgets they're manufacturing.
They can do it. And they're right. So that's left television, the place where the pursuit of excellence can be commercially viable. And I think we're having a tremendous golden age in television. I think and I think television has always been somebody to give writers control over their work I think alone, because I don't think it's as true in theater anymore. It used to be theater you had absolute control, but
They still have pretty absolute control.
But commercial pressures
are,
you hear the stories of you can have it your way or,
Yeah.
But television, if a writer does a show and connects with an audience, he's got a pass to do what he wants, uniquely so almost, I think.
And does that, this last 15 years, this golden age, which is a commonplace but a true one, and taking place not entirely but almost entirely on cable, does that make you, are you just, well, this is great, I love watching all these great shows, or do you itch to get back into it?
Well, I'm really lucky because I'm never out of it because of The Simpsons. So I'm always in a room. I'm always pitching. So
well, and The Simpsons is an interesting case because I mean, again, as I think about the modern history of television and this golden age, I mean, 1989. I mean, one thinks of the 90s with Larry Sanders and then The Sopranos at the end of the decade. That's the golden history. I maintain that The Simpsons is an extraordinary and enduring achievement that was the first weird, how on earth did that get made and stay on the air piece of television. Are you astounded that it worked and still works?
Certainly. Well, let's see. Astounded that it worked. Astounded that it worked. It was, astounded to be on the inside of something that always happened down the hall to somebody else. It's weird when you enter the culture. I swear to God, there's a crack, and suddenly there was. We were a few months into the show, and somebody put us on Satellite Dish magazine, the cover, and I put it on the wall, and then I always thought it was like, that sequence in Tootsie where suddenly she was on every magazine, and suddenly the wall was covered. It was really strange. And raced ahead of us. You could never catch up to it. It was never yours. It was always the show. So that was sort of healthy, that the show always raced ahead of the people who normally would, control everything.
Well, and in addition to its doing things that hadn't been done and being so singular and being so good, the fact that it maintained its quality for, people argue online all the time about when it was great, and as with all things that last a long time. But 24 years, I don't know another thing other than like on television, maybe 60 Minutes. That has been good for that long.
And weirdly, maybe there's a hunk of us who have been there from the start.
Yeah.
Weirdly. And yeah.
And I read that you at the very beginning, because you had, some leverage when it began, you got a sort of unprecedented creative independence carve out from Fox?
Yeah, Barry Diller and I will always argue because, the moment where I heard him say, no censorship, and then when we were really being watched, it became, debatable on a few things. But we set very rigid rules, and I think one of the things that contributes to the show is that when we dropped a rule, it just let us do a whole other kind of show. We had we were very reality-based. We were crazy for 2 years not to reveal who did the voices. We wanted the characters. We went by the same rules. We had done live-action shows, and we were rigid about it. And then we let that go a little, and then the show passed sort of from Bart being the star to Homer being the star. And then we say, okay, we're never going to do a show in space. We're going to be real enough. And then we went into space. And I think it's that kind of stuff. It's us putting up barriers that we then kick down.
So you can then thereby evolve at your own pace.
It's freshening. It's
Yeah.
freshening to say, let's do this, and it's something you didn't allow yourself to do a little while ago.
But I'm really interested in this no censorship, creative independence, because and that it was, by all appearances, maintained.
We got tremendous support. And it was a brand new network, and it was a network that was going broke and going bankrupt, and sort of if executives can be heroic, it was during those days when they were, running to pay bills,
Yeah.
and then everything switched.
Hollywood likes to say, as we've said today, that, we've had a salutary effect on racial attitudes, on attitudes toward gay people, and so forth. They like taking credit for the effects or putative effects that their shows and their movies have on doing good. But as soon as it comes to the question of, okay, what about your violent shows and your violent movies? Do those have no, that has no effect on real life violence. If one is true, doesn't the other have to be sort of true? Doesn't fictional depiction of violence have to have an effect?
Entertainment Weekly just did a breakdown of the greatest television series. Somebody picked the greatest television series ever. And I don't think anybody can argue with their first choice, which was The Wire. And that was, one of the most violent shows in history. And so the conversation ends, doesn't it? Arguably the greatest television show ever made was an extremely violent show. Yeah. So after you stop that conversation with that, then you're just having, are you trading on it? Is that what are you bad? Are you bad or good? Well,
you can use The Wire to say the argument ends. And let's get beyond television into movies. I mean, then
The Wire enfranchised characters that were real.
Absolutely.
Who lived in violence, as many people in this country do every day.
I agree.
Yeah.
But that's using the perfect and the best to potentially. I'm not saying there shouldn't be violent television. I'm just saying that poorly done, inuring people to the fun and thrill of violence is something that people who make those movies and shows have to cop to the possible effects as they're copping to the possible effects of.
The issue is whether you're good or bad from my point of view.
I agree.
Yeah. Justified is a violent show. It's brilliant.
What about Walking Dead?
Okay, yeah. Well,
as violent a show as there's ever been.
Well, yeah, but they're not quite people.
Exactly. The other thing that
they sort of explode in a sort of colorful way.
Yeah, I never thought a zombie show. I'm never going to watch that. I've watched every episode, so there you go. We talk. I mean, part of the subtext of this talk, I guess, is the text is what do shows, television tell us about ourselves? What do, now we have hundreds of channels and many reality shows that people love to hate, actually hate, the Honey Boo Boos and Housewives of New Jersey's of the world. Does that tell us anything about ourselves, or is it just that there's so much more opportunity to turn over those rocks and see other lives?
I think first of all, they tend to be, the reality ones would tend to be very dishonest and
scripted,
set up, yeah. And so that's it's if they did it in a different business, they probably could be arrested, for fraud. So there's that. I think it's beneath the conversation. I don't know. I think if you start to argue about how bad crap is, it's like.
Yeah, that smells bad. No, let me look at this one. This smells even worse. So as you say, you're still doing The Simpsons, but do you have a hankering to try to do your shot at The Wire, or?
I sort of. I'm a tremendous fan of television. So I watch it, and you can't not note. Mad Men is sort of a miracle to me. Mad Men, if you talk about, what's the question that keeps confusing me? What do TV shows tell us about ourselves? So Mad Men...
That we used to smoke and drink and have affairs a lot, I guess.
But Mad Men will hit, can do loads of story, which involves you as much as story can involve you, or they'll do just an existential show that says, holy shit, somebody else has 3 o'clock in the morning when they want to blow their brains out, which is sort of, which I think is sort of tells us something about ourselves. And I don't know who said it. It would be great if it was me, but I don't think it was. That one of the purposes of popular culture is to let people know they are not alone, and to see yourself reflected in something truthfully. I mean, I'll go back.
The purposes of fiction, not just popular culture, much of art, I would argue, is exactly that. Certainly why else does one read novels?
But television has this thing of, which it's not quite as much anymore, of being the watering hole, where all the animals come out of the forest and they see each other only when they, when there's a show which everybody watches.
And that's a huge and interesting change from, there's lots of sounds of agreement about Mad Men when you mention it, but it has audiences of 2 million, 3 million people.
And it's irrelevant.
You had audiences of 20 and 30 million people, more.
Yeah.
So a lot fewer animals coming to individual watering holes.
Yeah, I mean, there was a time, in the heyday of network television, network television, I had a show canceled with a 34th share. I mean, that's like unthinkable now.
Really?
It's like crazy. But Grant Tinker, who should be part of any conversation about television in any way, because this amazing executive who ended up as chairman of NBC, but was our boss for all the MTM shows, and beloved by everybody who ever worked for him, because he fought for us. I mean, it's just this weird thing, an executive who will put it on the line for himself to battle for you. It was crazy, But he used to say, do you realize that if you flew from Los Angeles to New York, it's two different slants. It's two different slants of it. There was a CBS president whose nickname was the Snake, I believe, who used to say, do you realize we program shows for people we fly over, which was some sort of contempt for people, I guess. Grant used to say the responsibility was that if you flew from Los Angeles to New York and you jumped out of the plane, on a Saturday night, you could very much land on somebody who was watching your show. And
That's funny. I'm sure there are plenty of questions in this audience for you, so why don't we bring microphones to the where they're supposed to be, and so any of you can ask questions.
Can I have your answer to that question? What do TV shows tell us about ourselves?
Well, I agree. I, as a child, watched television all the time in a kind of fugue state way, and then stopped when I went to college and didn't watch TV, except for The Simpsons, literally, for 20 years. And then in the last 15 years, I've started watching TV again because, exactly as you say, I am less interested. I'm interested historically in the questions I asked about how I think it had a tremendous, television had a tremendous effect on bringing white America around to racial progressivism. I think it's had the same on gay people. I'm less interested in that than I am in the extraordinarily great, by any standards, television that has been on the shows of the last 15 years. So I think it tells us that that fact tells us that we are that we're not going to hell. That civilization, the decline of Western civilization, has been prematurely announced, and that American culture is not only vibrant and there are lots of talented people in it, but that one way or another, even the bosses are allowing it to be expressed. I find it an incredibly hopeful fact that this what we call the golden age of television.
Wow, great.
So anyway,
Glad I am.
Madam, are we having microphones?
I think Jim's being a little modest. He may not have had an agenda for feminism, but by opening the door to women writers, by listening to us, by encouraging us, it was, first of all, the best experience ever to work for. And even today, women will come up and say how that show changed their lives, including Oprah and Katie Couric. So it was relevant to women's lives, and it did change it. And thank you.
We should follow up with Gloria Steinem and see if she still is pissed. Sure.
Hey there. What do you think of of binge viewing and how that has changed storytelling. When I talk about binge viewing, sort of the House of Cards model where people will take an entire 13 episodes, watch it all at one time, what that does to sort of the collective water cooler issue that you talked about earlier, but most importantly, the storytelling issue of how you actually tell a story if people are going to sit and watch all of it at one shot.
Well, there's no better question. I mean, because that's the revolution we're having now. The water cooler is much less important. It's an individual being able to select whatever they want at any time. I did The Wire on a binge. I think it was 60 shows, something like that, and it was a real binge, and it's a different experience, and I think it's a richer experience. I think, you know, when you're surrounded by it, when you go to sleep and wake up and experience it again, and that happens again and again. So if a show is, so you can immerse yourself in it, you can become part of it. I mean, it's like when there's great literature, you know, what a reader brings to it, when they're that immersed in it, when the book starts to have an effect on them. So there's a very different trip that is becoming a very common trip, I think, and I think it's changing everything.
And by the way, there's a precedent for it. 150 years ago, you could read Dickens once a month, or you could binge read when the books came out at the end of the serialization. So it's not a new thing. Over here?
Excuse me. A lot of discussion about the water cooler effect, certainly the shared common experience, which we don't have right now. We also don't have that in our political life. And I wondered if you thought that the change in television was cause or effect in relation to how we view our current political situation.
You know, television still, you know, even though television news has changed dramatically, we're still brought together in tragedy, in difficulty by television. And, you know, we experienced Sandy together. So I think that's still true. And then, you know, it's like when I was saying that we really try to slap hands off the wheel. Now, I mean, the wheel, the people are gripping that wheel and steering, you know, whole networks devoted to one way of thinking, certainly adding to the division between us so that instead of, I mean, it used to be, I mean, this is as quaint a thing as you're going to hear today, that a network had to prove that it was acting in the public welfare in order to be licensed by the government, and they were very frightened about that. That used to be. It used to be there was a mighty news organization that was wholly independent and just really fought for truth and had the ear of the American people, and on a given night could end McCarthyism. I mean, that used to be. And those days are gone forever, but television news is still enormously important, I think. And the misuse of television news is probably even more important than that.
Back here?
Reality shows seem to have taken over the airwaves, and I'm wondering what you think that tells us about ourselves in terms of that form of television.
I've watched 4 seasons of The Bachelor. I gotta so I can't, you know, I can't knock it as much as I'd like to. American Idol I was chained to for years. Oh God, excuse me.
That was very convincing Foley effect. I thought there was a dog coming up the stage.
I think reality shows are getting worse and worse, and but they were, you know, when the Survivor first happened, I was there. You know, I was, you know, I sort of felt a little funny when they started to give Emmys for it, and then accept that you can be excellent in anything. I think if all reality shows were honest, it would be a different deal, but The Bachelor, which I'm sure has a lot of help from its staff, sort of captured me for those seasons, you know, where I would talk to people about it the next day, and what happened on that date. So I just, you know, so it's just I'll take a walk of shame on that. I'm sorry.
Right here in the middle, ma'am. Yep.
You know, in your depiction of him, I always thought he was a nice-looking man, and I kind of then looked at him as a stiff tree. So, how powerful are these writers, do you think?
You know, it's true that I think most reasonable people will say the Daily Show brings you closer to the truth than a lot of shows you see, and you know, and Stephen Colbert making fun of what he makes fun of. It's like, yeah, I think that's what keeps, that's why you make the argument television's great. I mean, we're talking about something that's great. We see it great almost every night. You know, it's weird, and we keep on criticizing it, and it keeps on falling apart, and it's never been greater at the same time.
Hi. First, if you don't mind me saying, I think Spanglish and Starting Over are two of the most kind of underappreciated movies in their time. They get better every year. And I was going to ask, though, you're very unusual in that you're so successful both in drama and comedy. And I was wondering, do you struggle with being serious, or do you struggle with being funny when you're working in one form or the other?
My theory about doing this stuff is that you got to remember why you were invited to the party. I was invited to the party, thank God, because I would tell a joke and I'd be funny. And I think I can't believe that I can attend the party and be the serious guy commenting on the fate of the world. But when I did Terms of Endearment, the only thing to me that made that picture, that was desperately important for that picture, was that it clocked its laughs. I mean, that was absolutely. And then we were nominated for a Golden Globe, and they nominated us for Best Drama because they divide it. And I went crazy because come see it with an audience. And Paramount just stop it, And so I do believe that everything I've done meets in my terms as a comedy. And but you want a real emotional life, and you want it to be about real human beings. So that's where it gets. You have to give a little, and and feel a scene.
Right here. Yeah, I forget, of course, that Terms of Endearment is not just a weepy, that it's full of laughs.
If you see it alone now, that's what it is. When you saw it with an audience, and I was, and cancer was a weird word then, and I said I can't do this movie unless somehow I figure out how to get a laugh on the word cancer, and I went crazy over weeks because I thought I had to do that, or else I was doing,
We're talking about reality TV, and there's expensive reality like Idol and the dancing one and Bachelor, and then there's crap, admittedly, in the eye of the beholder, Amish Mafia, deep sea gold, getting crabs out of Alaska, whatever it is they do there, pickers, Pawn Stars. Oh, I've seen them all. The question, not me really, my husband is flipping channels, he just keeps flipping.
Be so ashamed of watching The Bachelor.
Actually, I didn't see that one, I see the crap. And I have been hooked on Idol, or The Voice. But, and it's definitely a difference between Amish Mafia and The Voice. One is a big production, the other's not. Do you see yourself as successful in all the venues you've been, possibly attempting a reality show?
Absolutely not.
All right.
Over here we can conveniently do several in one place and not have the microphone have to be moved.
Hi, my name is Oscar Lee. I'm a Bezos scholar from New Jersey. And I just want to say I really enjoy The Real Housewives. I hope that doesn't make me a lesser person. And I mean, I really enjoy it. It's entertainment, and that's why it's called entertainment, right? Anyway, so I just wanted to address the Will and Grace. You talked about how that increased visibility for gay characters, but in terms, I feel it established an unfortunate dichotomy in terms of what a gay man can be, in terms of being a bottom or a top, or a dominant or a passive. But my question really was about why I see on television, all the gay characters are either white, rich men, or live on the coast. Of course, there's The Wire, but really, who watched that? But I just wanted to know, why do you think that is? Are American executives not believe the American audience is not ready for a gay character that does not reflect who they are, or whatever? Yeah.
I don't think that there's anybody stopping anybody from writing the kind of character you're talking about. And as you point out, The Wire did have characters like that. And, you know, I just think people are free to write. I mean, it's a very democratic system. If people watch it, it works.
And one could argue also that it's early-ish in the history of this being on this mass medium, and until a certain point, black characters were portrayed. One could have had this conversation in 1975 and say, why are black characters always portrayed as so nice and so this and so upscale? And, you know, it takes perhaps a while for the other versions to proliferate, propagate.
Hi. So I was really intrigued by what you said about staying true to the characters of Mary Tyler Moore and staying true to the story and trying to keep these hands off the wheel. In terms of The Simpsons, you know, I feel like it's become a truism that The Simpsons is this satire of American life, and you know, you read online, you feel like you see these facts about what it does. I'm curious if being in a writer's room for decades, how you navigate that pressure. Like, is there a pressure that shows up to try and make a certain type of satire? And if so, how do you address that in the storytelling?
Yeah, so every once in a while we say, you know, come on, let's get edgier than that. You know, we try and police ourselves on being edgy, but not, just, so we try to not have, just a liberal agenda, which is what, we really fight hard to make fun of both sides. And we try and keep ourselves honest, and a lot of what takes place in the room, because the show, like a lot of shows right now, is very team written. I mean, yes, the script comes to the table, but then it gets really rigorously rewritten, sometimes from scratch by two rooms going at once. So there's a certain, when you do that, one of the good things is in terms of, sharp jokes and, just not every time the table laughs is it funny, but a lot of the times the table laughs because it's really funny. So you have that, this is, I think when it comes to comments like that, we once in a Mary Tyler Moore show, and I thought of it as one of those things that I always want to remember, that we were arguing over a line, and we were against a deadline. I mean, there was an audience there, and we had to change a joke, and somebody offered a joke, and there were like four of us standing together, and they said, I think that will work. I think that's funny. I think it's funny. I think that'll work. And then somebody else said, it's funny when everybody walks away because it's been solved. Everybody laughs and walks away. So in The Simpsons, you sort of know when it's funny. And then in terms of the spirit and what's a fair comment, and it's we talk to each other a lot. I mean, the thing with the show at this point is it's so much bigger than any of the people who do it. So we all are just serving this thing that got built up. And that part of it, a lot of us take seriously.
Ma'am.
With all the introduction of new media over the last 15 years, what do you think is the biggest change? What do you think is the biggest change for television with that, like the internet and iPads and everything? How we, relate with that?
Just there was a panel about it the other day. Just that thing where it's an individual using a device to see what they want when they want, and the interactive thing, I guess, is here to stay. It just was putting a foot in the door, and now it's every place. It's just do you remember the first time you saw something crawl across the bottom of your screen that didn't have much to do with what was on top of your screen, and then it was all over. So yeah, it's really taking place. The Netflix thing is real, and it's Amazon starting to do it. So it's big.
And people are paying, in a certain, one could argue, less attention because they're texting and doing other things as they're watching your programs.
Yeah. I don't go online to see the forums on our show. I mean, the other guys do, but I don't want one. I don't want a 14-year-old who has had a hard
I
day
think
at school
ignoring
ruining my
online
day.
comments is a good way to proceed in all realms. One more question, if anybody has one, right here.
There have been several references to this is the golden age of. There have been several references to this as the golden age of television, and I wonder if you could just talk for a minute about what do you think are the circumstances that have made that possible?
I think, remember the 70s movies? Golden age of American movies, I think I think most people would agree on that, those 10 years. And then movies stopped reaching for that. I mean, always the heartbeat's true, always somebody will be doing a great film at some time, always you can't stop it. But movies no longer have it as their reason for existing, at all. And so I think that sort of shoved people towards television. And you have in movies, how many outlets are there for, movies empower director to a tremendous degree. Television empowers writers to a tremendous degree. So I would say that's a reason too. And as people are continually rewritten in movies, and it's common to see so many different names on a screenplay, as it goes through that happens. In television, there tends to be a writer in charge of the show. So that doesn't happen. And television is interested in a new voice, in a new writing voice, even though maybe at the end of it it's niche. Independent movies still do that. Movies will always do it some. Television, there are whole networks, cable networks of television that are devoted to pursuit of excellence because it's where they make their money. I think that's why.
And because, right, they've found that they can make a profitable show with 2 million, 3 million, 4 million, 5 million people watching, which wasn't the case.
Yeah, and by the way, I think every place now, one of the changes, every place now, the accountant isn't somebody in some far-off room that you make fun of. The accountant is sitting there with you every minute, no matter what you're doing. I think that's another change.
Jim Brooks, thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Thanks.